what I like about what this film does, the last film I think was 100% a regurgitation of Scream 4.
Yeah, it was.
This I don't think is doing that. This is taking a much it's painting with a little bit of a broader brush. It's not doing the legacy sequel thing. I don't, in fact, it's not even commenting on sequels like specifically.
Yeah.
This Scream movie is about franchises. It's about franchise filmmaking and talking about that from a broad perspective, which I did appreciate. And then when you couple that with how
broad.
very broad for sure, but that
which
is
is maybe
at least
what
a
this
different
franchise
approach.
maybe that's what this franchise needs though. So
Yeah.
that might be a fair point.
I agree. And I think that's where I did find some interest because at least it's not what the last film was doing, which was almost verbatim an echoing of Scream 4. This
Yeah.
I don't think is doing that. It might be painting broadly, but at least it's doing something differently. And it's talking about commenting on franchises that aren't even in the horror realm, which again offers some, something different and new, which I
Yeah.
did like. And then I also think from a filmmaking perspective, from a storytelling perspective, it's channeling a lot of Scream too, which I am completely with you there, Brendan. So like, as it's acting as a sequel to the reboot that came out last year, if that's how we're going to label it,
Requel.
it takes the best things of Scream 2, as this is acting as the second film in this rebooted version of Scream, and channeling it in a fun way that echoes, what I think is already the best sequel in all of this with Scream 2, and then interjecting these broad strokes about franchises and the redundancy of that, which I did have fun with. There's one line of dialogue as it relates to everything that we're talking about here from the Mindy character that I think is one of the best lines in all of the franchises.
Is it
To me,
three
was-
simple words? Is that what you're
Yes,
thinking of?
100%. I laughed so hard. To me, that is easily one of the best moments in all of the meta-ness that comes with these films.
Regardless of what you think about these movies, there's always at least one line from every one of them that is utterly brilliant. And that one is certainly, I guess, the most nominal contention here for this movie.
And kind of gets to the heart of even what we're talking about here, and that, look, we've covered all of this territory, so screw it. We're not going to get it all right.
I think it's kind of lame. I'll be honest, and I don't think it goes. I don't think it goes with the rest of the movie. It's again.
I think it's 100% what this film is
how
about.
we're talking about the kind of subversion of much of this film. I think those lines should be really good, but they're not aligned with what the movie is, which is really just an homage to the other movies in a celebratory way.
Yeah, where I'll both agree and disagree
in a
with
franchise filmmaking kind of way.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It's not Gremlins 2, right?
Well,
which is
no,
a brilliant subversion and send up of its own predecessor. It's not that.
Where I'll agree and disagree with that regarding that line that we're talking about. I think to JD's point, I think it does fit within the realm of where this movie seemed to be going. And I guess I'm jumping the gun a little bit with one of my biggest problems here. What kind of ruins it for me, and where I could see your point, JD, or Jay specifically, is the killer reveal. I'll simply say that. I think this is the worst killer reveal of the entire franchise. And it's because it's been done in a Scream movie before.
Total regurgitation. Absolute regurgitation. But then is that the point? Is that the point?
Well, see, maybe. But I feel like, to your point, Jay, this movie was also functioning as this commentary on the predictability / unpredictability of franchise filmmaking nowadays. And to then go in that direction, I felt like was sort of a defeating of that purpose, especially where it goes afterwards regarding the Sam Carpenter character. So I think there's a point here where the film is trying to have its cake and eat it too in that regard.
Oh, for sure.
I don't think it succeeds. I think in order to have been more effective there, the killer reveal specifically needed to have been something bold, weird, and exciting, and I don't think it is. It didn't work for me, honestly.
Well, and that, to me, everything that both of you are just saying there is exactly why that line from Mindy is all the more potent for me.
Okay.
Because whether you find it all redundant, whether you find what the new things of this film, if you find that interesting, the line speaks to it all. And that to me, I just find absolutely hilarious. I honestly, I think that's a big reason why I laughed, because it's not that what she's saying is this grand epiphany as it relates to franchise filmmaking and what this film is doing in terms of its insight. It really has nothing to do with that. And everything to do with what Jay is saying in terms of how redundant, how we've gotten to a point where we've gotten to the threshold where the only thing we can do is speak to that in these broad terms.
So in many ways, it's basically her saying, "Here we go again." Like, here we go again is what she's saying.
So
okay, I see your point.
Like, I loved it for the reasons that you guys are talking about, and which is hilarious. But I do think it's really effective in that way. And even the way Mindy is written here, she does speak to a lot of those cliches that the film sort of wants to subvert, and in a way it kind of does, but not really, especially because of how redundant it is. And to me, it feels like the only cathartic way to articulate that is those three words, which I just find hilarious and very meta in a Scream kind of way. Because I agree with you guys. When you get into the tropiness of this film, there's really not much that it's doing that's different. I think, if anything, the tone is quite different than what we've seen.
And the kills are grisly.
Grisly.
This is the closest that I think Scream has come to resembling more of an action film than it does a horror film at times.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
I don't disagree with that. There's a lot more set pieces. I thought one of my least favorite parts of 5 was just that I thought the kills were super dull and repetitive.
Yeah.
There was nothing interesting about
the
kills
in
that
ante
film.
here.
They upped the ante for sure,
time.
but to your point, Jay, there's more attention put into the sense of place with regard to the kills. Now, one thing I do wish this film did a little bit more with was taking advantage of the New York City.
Well, they're not in New York City. If you stayed for the credits, they're in Montreal, Canada. So they had to fake it till they make it. Which again, that's another one of those things. I hate just coming back to this, but it's like, is that a commentary on the fact that historically all of these slasher films have, Jason Takes Manhattan or whatever, they're in Manhattan for 10 minutes. Is that kind of what they're commenting on? I don't know.
Maybe. Well, I bring it up broadly because it's not just the New York City specifically. It's the fact that aside from maybe one or two set pieces, the subway scene in particular, which I think is very effective, and then there's one involving a ladder, I'll simply say. Those two are really good. But aside from those two, you could have still set this in Woodsboro. I mean, it doesn't feel like I don't feel the urban landscape hardly at all here. And I wish that there was more to it than just the fact that it was a different location. But there are many times I thought this could have just been the same location once again.
Like when they're in, I assume at one point they're supposed to be in Central Park, but I was like, that could be a mile from my house. What is that? What's going on here? But it is, that is, I think, that was one of the things I was most excited about. I thought that was a really good selling point is let's totally change locations. Let's go to New York City. And you could even fake it better than they fake it in this movie. And it really just doesn't feel like they're in New York, which is obviously something that you can really take advantage of. And I understand it's expensive to film in New York. I don't know. The Safdies did it for way less money than this Scream movie did. So I don't know. Figure it out. But it does not have that. It does not have that New York energy that I wish it had, except for a couple of sequences that you're talking about there. That subway sequence, especially, I think is very, very effective. Even though surely that was on a set, probably, but still it captures the energy that they're looking for. Yeah,
I mean, most of this film takes place inside an apartment or an abandoned theater.
That's the thing. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if. You could tell us that these characters are in New York or they're away from Woodsboro. That's really all that matters, I guess. Could the film do more to give us that New York energy? Absolutely. I don't disagree with that, but the way this story is written, I don't know if it matters either.
Maybe
it honestly feels more interior because they set it somewhere else, which is a bummer.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe that was the point. Maybe that was all a subversion
I
tactic.
don't know. I feel like I'm talking about the Matrix Resurrections, my beloved Matrix Resurrections, which is just like you can chalk everything that people criticize about that film up to, yeah, well, that's the point. And you can kind of do that with this movie too.
Yeah, I think you can. Now, to be fair, there are sequences here that, I mean, mostly does take place indoors, but a lot of those sequences are pretty effective. You brought up that abandoned movie theater, JD, as one of the primary locations. There are some effective sequences there too, and I think they do get a little bit creative with that, especially in the final act. And while I didn't necessarily love the killer reveal for reasons we already talked about, the way they orchestrate the machinations of it and the things that happen afterwards involving Sam Carpenter, I'll simply say, I think is weirdly interesting and very dark and twisted, and kind of presents this idea of what happens to victims of such crimes over the years. Do they develop this thirst for blood as time rolls around? Like, is that even a psychological possibility? And I thought that was a very daring thought. Maybe they'll address that in Scream 7. I don't know if it's meant to be kind of like a setup of sorts, but playing with that a little bit here, it's kind of a provocative notion. And I kind of like that.
I mean, and especially when you consider legacy and her father and everything that goes
serial
into that
killer
as well.
bloodline.
Yeah.
You know, it certainly toys with that in a provocative way. And I think, honestly, that's where this film thrives for me, because you can certainly nitpick it to death and how redundant it is, you know, given where this franchise has, you know, gone before. But the tonal shifts with this film are very new.
Yeah.
And so it does this fascinating thing of giving the Scream fans what they want in terms of what this franchise does. But tonally, it is this new thing where you have, you know, these sisters and their dynamic, the core four, if you will, really, if you even
I do
wanna,
like the core four, and I was unsure about them in the first film, or Scream 5 specifically, but I really like them here. I think they've really come into their own as their
I
respective
agree.
characters.
I think they came together, and it makes sense to me, given that this film is talking about franchises and how expendable characters have become inside of franchises. And to me, that's where it is a little subversive, because as Mindy talks about in this film, every character in this franchise has been expendable to one degree or another. Now, most of them anyway. So when you're talking about, you know, franchises and how they've even tapped into that a little bit, that is where this film gets a little subversive, even if it is engaging in, you know, very tropey things, you know, in terms of its dramatic through lines and whatnot. And then tonally, it also swings the pendulum completely to the other side, where this is much more grounded emotionally than we've ever seen with anything in this franchise outside of maybe Dewey and what we saw with him in the last film, especially. And so to see how all of that crystallizes here, because I agree with you, Brendan, the reveal of Ghostface at the end of this film, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. Is it a little funny? You know, one character was right about all of this all along. I mean, maybe. And this is sort of working within the confines of a rebooted franchise, right? Because the last year's film was technically a reboot. So if we're talking about the second film in a new series of Scream films, maybe it's new in that regard, but
and maybe that's
again,
the point.
I'm stretching here if I'm giving it credit.
Because
but
every single Ghostface killer in these movies have taken inspiration from previous Ghostface killers. So there is this cult-like mentality that they worship these previous killers. And I feel like that sense of cult-like worshiping is most representative here in this movie. And I do find that at least kind of interesting, in trying to find a way to use that as a parallel to these cult-like fandoms for certain franchises. So if there's any meta quality there that I feel like is in relation to movies themselves and sequels and franchises, that's the one that I think is, at least, that one has some legs. I wouldn't say it's the most daring idea, but I could see that one at least carrying some topical weight with regard to the evolution of movie making, more so than whatever Scream 5 was saying.
well, regardless of where that lands for you, to me, it's less about that, because at the end of the day, I'm, because I've seen all of these films and I have liked this franchise up until this point for the most part, outside of last year's film.
Yeah.
Yes, we have seen this before in this franchise. So to me, it wasn't about pulling the rug out from under you and having some sort of sleight of hand.
Yeah.
I wasn't interested in that as much as I was the tonal variances of it. Like, the total change is what brings a refreshing quality to it. The performances certainly ham it up a little bit, so there is some fun there, and it's more action oriented than a lot of them tend to be as well. And so it does feel different, even if it isn't different, if that makes sense.
Well, the one thing I will say about the ending, just to throw my 2 cents in, from the perspective of how it works within the narrative of the film and the themes of the film, over the course of the film, all that they talk about, and to me, it was very clear that they're just talking about Star Wars. I was just like, okay, that you're kind of duplicating the first movie as an homage. You're saying, okay, everybody, let's get back into the swing of things. Force Awakens, Scream 5. We're going to put you back in the mindset of these films, remind you what you love so much about them. And then in this film, they just keep reiterating the key to the second film is you have to subvert. And then it's almost
even
like
invoke Luke Skywalker's name.
Well,
They do.
And if you remember in Scream 5, they make a Ryan Johnson joke, and here they make a Letterboxd joke. So,
I mean, I really think that is on the front of their minds as they're making this movie, because
Maybe.
everybody's
then-
made Star Wars,
well,
but
then
the problem
maybe-
was at the end of this film they don't subvert. It's almost like their subversion is subverting subversion.
Well, so then the
where
lack
they're-
of subversion becomes the subversion. Then.
Exactly. But I don't think that doesn't align to. I think that I'm gonna draw the line at giving them an out at that point. I'm cutting them off. They can't do that.
I will say,
But Jay, that's the point.
I really,
No,
oh my God.
no.
Put that as the sticker for the
Don't
poster. That's the point.
don't flip my Matrix Resurrection or Resurrections review back at me. Don't do that.
I will say, out of all the Scream films now, because of what we're saying, how somehow the lack of subversion at the end weirdly becomes the subversion. It's like the reverse has become the new standard, as Rory Culkin's character says in Scream 4. It makes me want to rewatch Scream 6 the most to see where it goes within this trajectory. It's not my favorite of the sequels. I still prefer 2 and 4, honestly, but I would rank this maybe around 4th place out of the 6, if I'm being honest. But it's the one I think has the most rewatchability in that regard, and it's because there is a tonal difference to it, like you're saying there, JD. And I weirdly like that tonal difference. At times it doesn't even feel like a horror film. Like I said, it feels like an action thriller at times, and I think it's a welcome change of pace, though.
And given the dynamic between our central, our core four, if you will, and especially the sisters and the dynamic at play there, it's interesting how the film channels that gravity, to I guess heighten a lot of that the thrilling nature that you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So again, I don't disagree with anything Jay is saying in terms of how silly and redundant and how uninsightful a lot of this film is, even if it is the point. But totally, there's a lot that is new here. And in terms of franchises, the commentary on franchises, maybe it's Star Wars specifically, I don't know. But I don't think it has to be exclusive to Star Wars. A lot of franchises fall into the same traps that this film is bringing up.
Sure.
That to me, it's much more beyond, like, we're beyond just legacy sequels and reboots and requels. It's painting with a broader brush. So it does do some things that's interesting.